Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sumant, Kulkarni, a senior biotechnology analyst with Canaccord Genuity, which is a global investment bank. I cover the neurosciences space for the firm on the public equity side of things and also keep track of everything that's cool on the private side. I've been following the psychedelic space for some time now, ever since these companies were private and a lot of them went public. You had a few bestsellers, Netflix series, and all those kinds of things happen in the space. And we're at an important time in this space, almost like a crossroads. 2026 seems to be a big year, so it's a really nice time to have this panel. With that, I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Ginger.
Hi. It's turned it on. So my name is Ginger Johnson. I am an SVP with a strategy consulting firm called Lumanity. And we work with companies that have early innovation to help shape the commercial trajectory, but we do it from a very early standpoint. And like Sumant, probably not as long as, not as deeply, been watching this space, so very excited for the panel discussion.
So the way we have it here is alphabetical by first name. It's very well designed, so we'll have each panelist introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Witowski, the co-founder and CEO of Psilera. And by background, I'm a PhD-trained natural products chemist. Just so happened to find myself in the golden era of the reemergence of natural products chemistry, both with cannabinoids and now with psychedelics. Largely these compounds are naturally derived. And I was already part of a startup called AltMed that I exited previously for over $1 billion. And now at Psilera, what we're focused on is developing next-generation neuroplastogens. And we do this through two ways, one of which is through drug formulations, which we've actually partnered now with AtaiBeckley, which was well represented here on the panel. And we're also focused on developing these next-generation non-hallucinogenic analogs, which we think have best-in-class potential. And for us, where we're focused is in kind of the intersection between neurodegeneration and neuropsychiatry. So in both realms, we have the clinical validation on psych, but also with more evidence of biomarkers, patient stratification from the neurodegenerative side. We're focused in frontotemporal dementia, and specifically within the psychiatric symptom domain of apathy, which is the main cause for institutionalization of patients with dementia, and also the leading cause for reduced life expectancy as well in this patient population. Our lead drug is called SIL006. It's a first-in-class candidate. We'll be first in human studies the beginning of next year.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Tucker, also a scientist like Chris, although I'm a biochemist by training. I'm the CEO of Enveric BioSciences. We're in quite a similar space to Psilera. Chris and I see each other an awful lot at these conferences. We too have been around about 4 or 5 years now, working in the non-hallucinogenic neuroplastogens is the area that we've decided to focus on. And our lead molecule is, we think, a first-in-class molecule, the first to be a dual agonist of two different very important receptors in the neuropsychiatry space. The 5-HT2A is a partial agonist, and the 5-HT1B as a full agonist. So that's the key molecule that we're focused on. We are in neuropsychiatry as opposed to neurofrontal temporal dementia, whatever it is. Sorry, Chris. And we see that the non-hallucinogenic neuroplastogens are going to fill a very important role as the psychedelic field matures. We think that there's probably a very powerful, impactful role for, let's say, classic or hallucinogenic psychedelics, certainly in induction and acute treatment. But down the road, we think there's a very large opportunity for non-hallucinogenic neuroplastogens, and that's where, like Chris, we are focusing our efforts.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Justin Hanka. I'm the CEO and founder of MindBio Therapeutics. I'm based in Melbourne in Australia. For the last 5 years, our company's been doing research using small doses, microdoses of psychedelics, specifically lysergic acid diethylamide. Our thesis was that we could use small doses of psychedelics to treat depressive disorders without the hallucinations. So I think the thesis is sound. We've run several clinical trials over the years. We've ran a large phase 1 trial with 80 healthy subjects, and we had significant, we found statistically significant improvements in mood and energy and feelings of social connectivity and subjective feelings of happiness in healthy patients. We've run a phase 2A trial in patients with major depressive disorder, and we've just completed a phase 2B trial, which unfortunately our primary endpoints were not met. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kabir, Nath, CEO of Compass Pathways. Compass is in phase 3 with COMP360, our synthetic proprietary formulation of psilocybin. We declared the primary endpoint of our first phase 3 trial in June last year. We are expecting the primary endpoint from our second phase 3 in the back part of this quarter, together with the 26-week data from that first study, 26-week data from the second study early in quarter 3, which would be the gating item for completing our NDA submission. We've had a discussion with the FDA around the potential for a rolling submission and review. With that, we are anticipating potentially filing in the latter part of this year. And in terms of commercial prep, we are planning to be launch ready by the end of 2026.
Hi, everyone. My name is Srinivas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AtaiBeckley, previously Atai Life Sciences. We actually just completed a merger with a company called Beckley a few months ago. So we are focused on short duration psychedelics. Certainly our lead programs are psychedelics with durations of less than 2 hours or approximately 2 hours. Both of those are in treatment-resistant depression. We read out some very positive phase 2B data in treatment-resistant depression last year. That asset is called BPL-003. We are going to be entering into phase 3 this year with that one. We also have a second asset called VLS-01 that's in phase 2B currently. We're anticipating a readout on that in the second half of this year and anticipate that also moving into phase 3 shortly thereafter. And finally, we have a third asset called the MPO1. This is being developed for social anxiety disorder, phase 2A readout this quarter. So again, 3 separate assets, all psychedelic. The first one, actually, BPL-003 is 5-methoxy-DMT. Then we have DMT and VLS-01, and then our MDMA and that last asset, EMP-01. So good to meet everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Mays. I'm the CEO of Annual Neuroscience. We are developing a product called RE-104, which is a psilocybin analog, or more specifically, a prodrug of 4-hydroxy-DIPT. We turned positive phase 2 data in the third quarter of 2025 in a postpartum depression study with women with moderate to severe postpartum depression, 84 women at 35 sites across the United States. In addition to RE-104, we have a non-hallucinogenic neuroplastogen called RE-245 that is also in development. Thank you for having me on the panel.
Thanks for that. So the way we organize this is we'll start with business development trends, then go into a little bit of the regulatory side of things. Then we'll look at the key clinical trial readouts that are coming in this space this year, and we'll end with how the commercial model might evolve. So on the business development side, clearly the whole space was catalyzed by AbbVie buying Gilgamesh's bretisilocin. Not only did they buy bretisilocin, they also used the word psychedelic in their press release, which was a pretty big deal. So along those lines, I'm going to put you guys on the spot and ask you a question. Do you think we're going to see more of this major pharma involvement in the space, or was AbbVie more of a flash in the pan? Chris?
Yeah, happy to take that. I mean, we're certainly seeing interest from our side, from larger pharma companies. I mean, certainly there's been more than one company, AbbVie, Otsuka, as well as Novo has made some bets even on the panel here. So yeah, I mean, I think the clinical evidence is hard to argue with at this point. There's obviously a huge unmet need across any of the therapeutic areas that we're talking about, whether it be neurodegeneration, neuropsychiatry. there's no clear winner-take-all drug or even modality within what we're doing. So I certainly expect certainly more deals to ramp up, either equity-based deals, acquisitions, or just traditional business development and licensing. Certainly you've got a first mover now, which probably will catalyze some more of this. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the clinical data, the data packages across these companies. So I'll let some of the panelists comment too.
Srini is nodding his head, so
I can jump in.
Yep, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think what precipitated that deal is, I mean, I don't know that personally, but is likely, of course, the sales of Spravato, right? So Spravato sales initially got off to kind of a slow start, 2019, 2020, and of course launched into COVID, which didn't help anything in the context of interventional psychiatry. But obviously they've really hit their stride with that. I think last year being 2025, they were estimated to get close to $2 billion in the 1.7 to 1.8, maybe even north of that. It's entirely possible they did that. And of course, that's really what's, got the field excited about the notion of interventional psychiatry with a drug, as opposed to, with RTMS and things of that nature. So as long as that trajectory continues, and I think they're anticipating sales north of $3 billion over the course of the next couple of years, then I think that interest, along with the very positive results, that'll maintain that interest from other parties.
And Kabir, do you have anything to add? Because you have a very public currency in the form of stock.
Well, I guess, companies get bought, not sold. So I suggest you ask the big pharma what their plans are. No, but I think a couple of things. If you look back at Harry's presentation this morning, he pointed out that over 80% of psychedelic trials have succeeded. I think it's probably fewer than 20% of traditional approaches in psychiatry have succeeded, and certainly we've seen some very, very big failures of big and very expensive programs in the last year and a half. So if you're a big pharma company that is truly interested in helping to transform psychiatry and meet what are still some very large unmet needs, it behooves you to look at psychedelics, but you have to ask them what their plans are.
Probably should have done that in my first panel when AbbVie was on. In any case, I missed that opportunity. So, Joe, please go ahead.
Yeah, so, and when I look at that deal from the outside, there's a couple of signals in there, if you're trying to read between the lines, that I think that bode well for this being a harbinger of more such deals. And the first is that, the relationship between Gilgamesh and AbbVie stretches back a few years. So they're clearly, this is not a one-off, but they've spent some time to get to know them. And then you see this deal completed in addition to the licensing deal that they already had in place. So I think that speaks to AbbVie's confidence in something that they've had a fair amount of time to dig into. And then the second takeaway, even though I think it was not initially disclosed, the ratio between the upfront and the rest of the deal, I believe you can read between the lines in some SEC filings and see that a large percentage of that deal was actually done up front. I think it's something like 900 million of the 1.2 billion, I think. And that speaks volumes in terms of AbbVie's feeling that the asset is de-risked. So I think if you can translate that to, what everyone else up here is doing, the more we see AbbVie and others feeling that the field is de-risked, the more I think you're going to see deals getting done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, from my perspective, the other thing that has also really helped catapult the psychedelic space as a result of that deal is investors. The investors have really taken note of it and now believe that the data can be transformed into a stronger exit. So it's one of the first questions I get in a number of my meetings is, how do you compare to the AbbVie asset? What do you see? Do you see more of those, et cetera? So very, very exciting for sort of the companies that are sort of just populating or might be a little bit further behind some of the companies that are already in phase 3.
So before I turn it over to Ginger, you brought up investors. So I'm going to ask like an investor plus a strategics question. What do you think strategics value most when they look for partnering? Is it stage of development of the product? Is it duration in the clinic? Is it durability? When you discuss this with others across the table, what are they looking for in your programs? And we'll start with you, Greg.
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a evolution with investors. From my perspective, this is my third year at Reunion, and originally there was big questions about the scalability and whether how this could all work. I think to Srini's point, I think people have taken notice of the Spravato example. They've seen other companies really invest and prepare for launch and commercial infrastructure. So that no longer seems to be the biggest question. I think one of the leading questions now is time in the chair. And how long is this all going to take? Are patients going to prefer it? Are providers going to be able to manage within the administration of time? So that is a leading question. I think there's been a confidence and acceptability, to Kabir's point, that there's a strong bolus of efficacy data there. And they're not surprised when you tell them you had a positive top-line phase 2 study. There's actually more of an expectation. So I don't think it's necessarily efficacy. Again, I've seen a little bit of a migration to time.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So it's not often that you have a 2-hour or less development stage product in the clinic. The CEO of that company is sitting next to the CEO of a company that's developing something that's 6 to 8 hours in the clinic. Yes, and that's the most important part. And they like each other, so that's the best part, right? So clearly Compass is in the lead from where the product is in a phase perspective of the clinical trial process. How would you compare and contrast your product's differentiation versus a shorter duration and vice versa?
How long have we got?
43 minutes.
2 hours.
No, clearly durability is one element of the patient experience that's differentiating. But honestly, the difference between a psilocybin experience and a 5-MeO DMT experience, I would not necessarily say that durability is the most salient feature of that difference. These are completely different experiences from a patient perspective. And there's been a tendency among all of us to forget about patient and provider preference when we talk about this. Yeah, we can get into the economics, and you can make a case that the economics of a day, in fact, suit many providers better because they don't have to turn the room and so on. But fundamentally, given the number of patients there is going to be room for a number of different approaches. There's also, frankly, going to be polypharmacy as a number of these come to market. I don't think anyone expects that you will see solely one medicine used for any given patient at a point on their journey and so on. So again, I know it's fashionable to talk about durability as the primary element of differentiation. I actually think that's naive, and there are actually much bigger elements of differentiation and complementarity.
If I could, please, Srini, please.
Listen, I completely agree that this is not a zero-sum game, right? This is, we keep emphasizing the fact it's a big market, and depending on how you look at it, treatment-resistant depression in particular, on the order of 3 million patients. The $1 billion in sales of Spravato was on the order of 50,000 patients, right? So that's what you got to think about, 50,000 out of 3 million. There's a lot of unmet medical need. There's a lot of people suffering, and different people realistically are going to benefit from different compounds. I do fundamentally believe that. My mindset from the outset was kind of short duration. It was just, one of those things that allowed us some additional opportunities. Obviously, the folks that we talk to do have a bias towards that, but that's fine. I do personally think that all of these compounds, once they make it to market, are going to be quite successful.
Chris?
Yeah, I just want to say I agree. I think the durability is going to be one of those questions because Spravato has a very clear product category and is obviously successful commercially. But I do want to say something, and somebody posed me to say something spicy up here, and I think it's going to be, 5-methoxy-DMT, DMT, psilocybin, 4-hydroxy-DIPT. These are very, very different drug experiences. And I think, over time, I think very soft factors in terms of whether you want to define it as adverse events, not drug-like ability, but I think the tolerability of some of these experiences are going to be better than others. And that's a personal opinion, certainly. But I think over time, and as we get more patient data, I think we're going to start to see there's probably a preference to certain, whether it be a time-based duration of experience or the actual experience itself, that patients and physicians ultimately are more comfortable with. I know maybe not everyone can comment on that, but I think that is a soft factor that over time will probably become a little bit more realized.
Okay. So I want to not switch gears a little bit, but not focus right now on the commercial model or economics, but focus on the data. And I know the data influences the commercial model and the value, but in terms of your experience with the regulators, so the FDA and the DEA, talk about what they are expecting. Surely it's the way your trial is designed, but are they friendly? Are they learning with you? Are they supportive? And then a little bit for this audience, because I'm not sure that it's clear what the data means for the value of the patient. Some of these HAM-D and HAM-A and the duration data that you have shown is truly remarkable, and I'm not sure that that's well known. So maybe Kabir, you want to start since you're furthest along?
Yeah, so certainly our experience has been that the FDA is very supportive. So we have had breakthroughs since 2018. We have had stability in the psychiatry division, including within the current administration. There's been no change at division leadership or the level above that. A very good level of engagement and a real problem-solving sense, because clearly there are lots of unknowns here. I mean, when we started this, nobody really understood what a chronic episodic intermittent dosing paradigm looks like in psychiatric disease. We've been learning that with the agency and so on. So I would say we're extremely happy with that relationship. Clearly, there are more senior figures within the administration who make public statements about psychedelics. I think it's fine that they've done so, and it's probably even better if they stop doing so, because we're just focused on really putting together a very robust package and putting it in front of the division, and hopefully that being sufficient to get an approval.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add to that. I mean, all of our interactions dating back a number of years across programs have been very positive. Some of you may be familiar with Lykos. They had a very challenging AdCom a while back in 2024, I guess. And it was interesting. Our pre-IND meeting for VLS-01 was literally the next day.
Oh,
so
wow.
we had a cast of about the same 25 people-ish that were at the AdCom. Were at our pre-IND meeting, completely different tenor, very collaborative. We actually worked out ideas as peers in terms of some elements of the clinical trial that ultimately made it into the phase 2B design that we're currently running. So it's been very positive. I don't think that's really changed. We obviously continuously do have interactions across 3 programs.
Mm-hmm.
Again, nothing hugely changed. And yes, there's been a lot of public statements that have been made about psychedelics. That's good. It's not bad. I mean, I guess if they had said that they were against it, that'd be a different problem. I think one thing we have always emphasized is don't make we don't want anybody like reducing the bar, lowering the bar for psychedelic approval. Treat them like drugs and make sure that the same high quality data set is needed, just like you need for any other compound, is also required for a psychedelic. That's really been our ask, which is an unusual ask. But I know that's something that you've emphasized as well.
Okay. Does anybody, and if you want to go back and talk to this, but I was going to ask about, does anybody want to speak to what I was talking about in terms of the primary endpoint and the durability and the time to onset, and just how important that is in the context of the current standard of care in terms of the data that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone on this panel would say rapidity. I mean, rapid onset is fundamental. I mean, that's fundamental to something that we're all doing, yes?
But what's rapid? I'm just looking for to say, hours versus weeks, a delta versus placebo of single digits versus double. I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the standard of care for far too long in this area of neuropsychiatry has been SSRIs. Let's all be honest about that. And, that's the common issue is 6 to 8 weeks or whatever sort of standard time period you want to throw out there. And I mean, in the case of our phase 2 trial at Reunion, we saw a day of treatment effect. And that's just remarkable. And, I think sort of, these are people who have deep problems and are desperate for treatment. And the more rapidly we can deliver them, it's meaningful. So there is a difference. And, when your doctor says, you're not feeling well and it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks versus you could feel better tomorrow, I think the choice is going to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to be clear, this is at the heart of Spravato's uptake. Yes, it is the rapidity of onset, despite what, frankly, is a pretty punishing administration protocol, over the first month, 2 months, or indeed ad infinitum. But the rapidity with which esketamine works, I think, is key to Spravato's uptake.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, just historically, whether you looked at tricyclics or you looked at monoamine oxidase inhibitors, SSRIs, et cetera, they all took X number of weeks, right? And that X is variable a little bit, but it's still on the order of 2 weeks before you really even start to see anything, and then really 4 weeks if it's going to work for a given patient. So that's the challenge. The big change with Spravato, the big change with ketamine, that initial data set, those data sets were published in the early 2000s. The remarkable element was that the mood elevated immediately, right? That was the big change. And that's what really, that's exactly right. That's what's driving Spravato. But the problem there is durability. So you got to keep taking it all the time, right? I mean, the majority of people are still getting, for their maintenance phase with Spravato, are getting it every week to 2 weeks, the vast majority. That's a lot. You're losing a day, essentially, or at minimum a half day, but you're really losing quite a bit. What's remarkable about the psychedelics is you get the same rapidity of onset, but you get durability. So and now you can start thinking about maintenance that's every 12 weeks, on that order. Complete game changer, right, for the patients in particular, as opposed to losing a day per week. Now we're talking about 4 days a year, not a problem. Very different paradigm. So that I think that's the real change here.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. Can I ask one more question? One more small question. So I'm back to the data. So for the FDA and the DEA, if you're looking at the hallucinatory effects or experience, what are the conversations with the FDA and the DEA like in terms of scheduling, changing of scheduling? How do you say there is little or no hallucinations with this treatment? I mean, it's sort of, I don't know how you prove that.
Okay, so just stepping back for a moment. So what is scheduling? What does it mean, right? So Schedule 1, where these compounds are right now, means that there's a risk of abuse and they don't have a medical use, right? That's what it means. You can debate whether or not there's a risk of abuse, but at any rate, at the moment, it's impossible to argue that there's no medical use. There is a very clear path that's already well trodden, right? So once you get an approval, you can then get differentially down scheduled. This happened in, I think it was the 1990s with THC, right? It was brought to market for SINV, no, I think it was actually HIV anorexia originally, and then it was SINV, chemo-induced nausea vomiting afterwards. In the early 2000s, it was gamma hydroxybutyrate. It's referred to in the drug format as sodium oxybate, but it's literally the same compound. So that was a schedule, that was originally, it was deemed Schedule 1 because it was used as a date rape drug, essentially.
Right.
So that got approved and that got down scheduled. Now it's important that, THC itself is still Schedule 1. It's just the drug product is down scheduled. Just like GHB is still Schedule 1, but Xyrem and its children are down scheduled.
Right.
So that's what's going to happen here. Now, there's a standard process by which this happens. Once the FDA approves a drug, they petition the DEA to downschedule. And there's an analysis called an 8-factor analysis that kind of goes into that. But they basically petition the DEA. Typically, it's perfunctory. I can't imagine it'd be different. At the DEA level, it's statutory 90 days for them to downschedule. I've heard some rumblings that they've been pushing the timeline out, but statutorily it's 90 days. There's another level beyond that, and that is that some states have their own DEA kind of thing going as well. So some will just react to what the federal DEA does. Others won't, so then there's some additional work that has to be done there. But that's basically the process.
Okay. And that's across the board for the psychedelics and the neuroplastogens.
That's different. Yeah, go ahead.
I can speak to the neuroplastogen side at Psilera. So our lead drug, SIL006, it's a psilocybin analog, psilocybin Schedule 1. We worked with a contract manufacturer who works with the DEA. There's no liability that our drug will be a Schedule 1 drug. Makes it a lot easier to manufacture the drug, ship the drug, even work on it from a clinical standpoint. On the clinical side, in showing a drug is non-hallucinogenic, there are well-known scores for showing your drug is dissociative, psychoactive, hallucinogenic. And, for us as a company, we're looking at those as, essentially we want to see devoid of those signals. And there is a case study. So Delix Therapeutics, they were on a panel earlier today, and, their phase 2 program, a neuroplastogen, is now cleared for take-home use. So that's really kind of the goal of neuroplastogens is how do we treat this like a traditional medication where you've got a 30-day prescription in your medicine cabinet at home. And there is a precedent now, and we're certainly going to follow in those footsteps.
And yeah, I'll echo what Chris has said. Our interactions with the DEA have been, very straightforward. Because we're creating a whole bunch of novel molecules that a lot of them look a lot like these psychedelics. And so, our interactions with them has been, it's a novel compound right now. Have you seen anything in humans that's convinced you it's psychedelic? And I look at the rats and say, no, we haven't done anything in humans yet. And so they're like, all right, it's fine. At this point, it's not a hallucinogenic agent. Now, if you find in your clinical trials, you prove that it's hallucinogenic, we'll deal with it differently. But right now, it's a non-scheduled entity.
And do you want to add anything about the microdosing?
Yeah, sure. I think from an Australian perspective, the Australian regulators have taken a great leap forward with these substances. So psilocybin and MDMA have been medically legalised, have been downscheduled. So the environment for running clinical trials, for doing further research with these substances and analogues and so forth is terrific. But obviously those in about 3 years, I think we've treated just under 150 patients. So the scalability of these treatments isn't as good as we would have hoped, and the accessibility and the affordability. I think for one treatment, it's $24,000 in an average clinic to get this done. So our thesis with microdosing was that perhaps using small doses, we know that there are acute dose day effects and to supporting the effects of these drugs. We know there's a dose day effect, and we thought that perhaps we would be able to use them scalably. And our thesis that people could take them at home and then get on with their day without the hallucination experience. So we did that with thousands of doses, and in New Zealand, actually, sort of across the bridge in New Zealand, where the regulators approved the use of LSD at home. So we would send patients home with 2 weeks of LSD at a time. So we're finding the regulatory environment is becoming very supportive in Australasia.
That's great. Thank you.
So we'll turn to some expectations for the key readouts this year. But before that, I just want to stay on the concept of microdosing. I think some of the work that you did was really valuable and gave you a real answer. So the question is, do you think microdosing is still a viable concept?
That's a very good question. So our earlier studies were very positive, and so that our phase 1 was in 80 healthy men, and we saw substantial acute dose day effects on mood across the board, improvements in sleep, and so that was very encouraging leading into a phase 2A trial in patients with major depressive disorder, and we saw significant improvements in depression scores. The MADRS, we saw a 72% reduction in depressive symptoms sustained 6 months post-treatment. So we were really surprised recently when we completed a phase 2B in 90 patients with MDD that our primary endpoint was not met. The intervention group did not exceed the placebo responses. So that was a real surprise to us after 5 years of work here. So what does that mean for microdosing? Well, what we found so exciting about microdosing, and I think perhaps some of the approaches, the non-hallucinogenic approaches, is that this might be a scalable way to use a neuroplastogen. So in microdosing, we see changes in BDNF, so it's evidence of plasticity and structural changes in the brain. It's just that the standard our trials the LSD does not meet the microdosing does not meet the standard to treat patients with depression. If anything, it's more of a nootropic. It definitely makes people feel better, but not enough to improve their clinical depression scores.
So with that, we'll go to expectations for the key readouts. Kabir, you made a point here. You've seen lots of psychedelic trials succeed. In fact, I get a lot of questions from investors, and the question is never is the product going to work or not. It's always how good is it going to be. So as we approach your phase 3 results here, how would you best characterize in a quantitative way what a quote-unquote good score might be on the Montgomery-Åsberg Depression Rating Scale?
Well, that's very simple. I'm not going to. There is no benefit for me in giving a number because whatever I give, will be disappointing or something to investors. So what we're looking for is statistical significance. And again, to be clear, if we do get a statistically significant result, we will have de-risked this from a regulatory perspective. Clearly, what that translates to in terms of clinical and commercial practice will be up to us, but I'm not going to give a number.
So because you're not going to give a number, I'm going to ask anyone else on this panel to see if they would volunteer a number that they might consider good. Because I know that no doc's going to send home anyone with the placebo, right? So that's established. But what do you think is as good? Maybe Chris, if you have an opinion?
I mean, statistical significance is the goal. So I don't know if I can comment more than that, but happy to pass it on to anyone else on the panel.
No, thank you.
I guess that puts an end to that line of questioning. Because I was going to ask you about MindMed's product next, and then Cybin's or Helis's product after that. So.
Oh, I'm sure we'd all get comments on MindMed's product if you want to.
Go for it. All right. So on that note, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. Okay. Let's get into commercial. So we've heard scalability. Not for all of you, but how valuable is the Spravato model, and what is it that J&J had to do or did that you can leverage, and is it enough? And what I'm thinking of is, I'm sure you know these statistics, and I've forgotten the exact numbers, but the number of patients with treatment-resistant depression versus those that receive interventional therapies such as neuromodulation or Spravato it's a huge divide. And why is that? Is it because we don't have the places to treat them, or what else? So I know that was a multi-part question there. I guess follow with the scalability and Spravato and what J&J has done and how you can leverage that. Anybody can take it.
obviously, we're a little further behind Compass as well as MindMed, so we are initiating our phase 3 program this year. But as I mentioned at the get-go, our focus has been on products that potentially could have a label that's very similar to Spravato, right? So that the vast majority of individuals could be discharged at the end of 2 hours. So it's tested 2 hours, and then the vast majority potentially eligible for discharge at that point, which is just like Spravato. It's not like everybody can go home at 2 hours, right? So that's how we have always focused things. So that was the internal program initially at Atai, VLS-01. That was based on DMT, has a very short half-life, so we put it in a formulation that was patient-friendly, and we got something that's around 2 hours. Same thing with BPL there, it's intranasal. So our expectation is that we can leverage much of the infrastructure that Spravato has put together, assuming what I said comes to pass, that the label looks very similar. Right. We don't have, it's interesting, the time in flight, as it were, in terms of psychedelic effects is pretty short in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, if you're thinking about like kind of a maximal effect, it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It's not very long. Mm-hmm. So that too, I think, helps in terms of what the site requires. So that's, so we believe we can leverage a fair amount of it. There are some differences. There's still, the FDA still is requiring at least one person in the room. I think that is a bit of a holdover from a long history with psychedelics and with other assets. We hope that in time we can generate the data that makes it more like a ketamine, S-ketamine, where you don't necessarily need someone in the room. You do need someone closely monitoring over a video for how these patients are doing. I mean, I don't think it. Ultimately, hopefully we can get there. We don't anticipate getting there from the get-go, however.
Yeah, I think to address, Ginger, your question on the fact that even between TMS, Spravato, off-label ketamine, it's still a fraction of the millions of patients with TRD, let alone MDD. So the development of the interventional psychiatry infrastructure is a necessary part of that. But that's probably not the gating item. You've seen we now have close to 7,000 centers offering Spravato. That's grown hugely, continues to grow. You're seeing an increasing level of comfort among physicians at those treatment centers. The biggest here is physician and patient behavior. The reality is the majority of people don't get referred to an interventional psychiatry center until far too late. So, the typical Spravato patient is 5th or later line, even though that's not in line with label or indeed in line with prior auths. Prior auths typically are in line with label. And so that kind of reluctance or slowness of psychiatrists to refer is actually the biggest barrier to growing these numbers. And that's where the more products that get approved, ultimately that will start to get there. I mean, for instance, if and when COMP360 gets approved, that will actually be good for Spravato. That will actually expand the market. That will expand the number of patients and so on. And you'll probably see an inflection point in their growth as well, because that's what happens in psychiatry markets. So yes, the infrastructure absolutely is developing, and you're seeing psychiatry, the provision of psychiatry, gradually move towards something with a much stronger interventional psychiatry infrastructure, away from small practices and so on. But that's still got a very long way to go.
Is there an infrastructure need for the neuroplastogens? Training?
The way we're looking at it from an early stage standpoint is proving the drug doesn't require supervision. And I think getting over that hurdle for take-home dosing certainly alleviates a lot of the risk on the infrastructure needed in order to scale the therapy. And that's, again, some of the beauty of the neuroplastogen area. I think on the commercial model too, one thing I wanted to mention, ketamine and Spravato, there is probably a very sizable racemic off-label ketamine market in these clinics that are popping up everywhere. I would say even, probably the market for Spravato is double what it actually is. Just only half of those patients actually go to a physician, get the reimbursement, where there's still a sizable market of patients who need treatments. And ketamine is ketamine, whether it's the S, the R, or the R and the S. So I think, like Kabir said, having more options is only going to increase awareness from physicians, from patients, I mean, Spravato, they're not really marketing the I've seen one or two Spravato commercials, but that's about it. I think, word of mouth has really carried that. And, I think that's probably to the benefit across the panel.
Okay. I had one more commercial question. Good. The payers. Always you need to get ready for supporting the value of the asset. Real world data, health economics, outcomes research. I think scalability feeds into the cost of that care. Are the expectations and the justification, do you feel like there's more with the psychedelics that you have to prepare even ahead of launch from a payer perspective? That's a question. More compared to, I don't know, anything else.
Well, I guess since we are potentially the closest, let me start with that. So, yeah, I think, and as a reminder, we're in treatment-resistant depression, which is a huge economic, practical, and social burden. So the costs of treatment-resistant depression account for more than half the costs of all depression, because these people sadly frequently in emergency room, in hospital admissions, and so on. So there is, we will be doing the classic direct economic cost modeling because we need to, and given that ISA came after MDMA very quickly, our assumption is that ISA will be on our backs sooner rather than later, so we're getting prepared for that. But I think there's a really important point here, which I think we also need, I'd love to hear other people on the panel. I mean, we're all focused on regulatory endpoints like MADRS, which no patient or physician cares in the slightest about. No patient will tell you what their MADRS score is or how pleased they are that it's gone down or what it's new there is. They want to get their lives back. And psychedelics actually, for the first time in depression, in chronic depression and so on, offer people the chance to get their life back in a way that they used to live it before, without serious side effects, without a diminution and so on. We don't talk about that much because, there's no point in going to the FDA and saying, hey, we've got these really fantastic social scales and so on, because they won't be very interested. But I think that, to me, that is the profound element that we can bring forward to psychedelics. Now, does Optum care about that either? Probably not, but that's up to us to create ultimately that true value story about how these things are not, I don't like the phrase disease modifying because that tends to be a cure or solution, but they're potentially life modifying. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to that. I mean, so far there has been surprisingly little pushback to Spravato. I mean, some of these folks, as I mentioned, are getting it every week, and I think it's $60,000+ a year at that point. But so far, there hasn't been a ton of pushback as more things make it to market and as it starts to climb up the priority. I mean, the list in terms of costs for the payers, then I suspect there will be more restrictions put. But at the moment, so far, it seems pretty straightforward. And in addition, they're not, from what we understand, and it'd be good to get your take on this as well, the payers are not even really requiring all the heavy paperwork that you need in a clinical study to demonstrate treatment resistance. So here, for a clinical trial, you actually have to document that there were 2 failures in the current episode. And episode is such a badly defined term. I mean, someone that's got chronic depression doesn't know when their episode ended and a new one started. So it's a really messy process. Payers don't seem to be really requiring that. They do need evidence of failure of 2, but then they're going ahead and reimbursing it. So far so good, but of course that is subject to change.
Good. Take it back.
So, Kabir, you brought up a really important point, which is getting one's life back. What are you thinking about pricing on a product that could get someone's life back?
We'll wait for the data and then I'll tell you.
But is this Spravato price a good sort of, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, clearly Spravato is a benchmark. It's the obvious benchmark. And as Srini said, depending on the number of administrations, that can run $35,000 to $60,000 a year just in drug cost.
What about sweet spot on durability of effect? and this is to make my life easier to model things, but would quarterly dosing be good? Is it 6 monthly? Is it once a year? How are you thinking about that? Srini?
I think it's going to end up being a distribution, right? So, what I've said since the get-go is that for a certain percentage of people, this drug will not work, right? Because it's a drug. And another percentage of people on the other side, one dose may be all they need, right? And everybody else is going to be in between. Now, this is never going to be a weekly dosing or bi-weekly dosing like ketamine, but could it be 8 weeks? Yeah, I could sort of see that. And maybe there's a very small tail that require it, maybe more frequent, like 4 weeks. Even that is straining credibility, to be honest with you. But I could easily see something like 8 weeks, and then beyond. Again, it's all about the distribution.
And we've kind of disproportionately spoken about treatment-resistant depression and depression, but there are other indications. So, Greg, I know you have a postpartum depression and you also have another program running. So, how are you thinking about the market being potentially maybe too crowded in treatment-resistant depression from a developer point of view versus some of the other things that these products could be used in? We'll start with you, Greg, and then Chris and Justin and Joe.
Yeah, I mean, we're exploring non-refractory acute conditions where durability is, it's always an important factor, but where we are definitely analyzing the efficacy and durability of the product in a much more condensed manner. So that's exciting. I think, again, to what other panelists have said, there's going to be room for lots of modalities and patient preferences at the end of the day, and quite frankly, different types of. Unfortunately, there are, as we all know, several indications that are all suffer from being a huge unmet medical need.
Justin, if you have any views on that, and also maybe if you can weave in a perspective on ex-US pricing, given we seem to be US-centric.
No, look, I don't really have much more to add to that other than we chose LSD over psilocybin for our trials, given that LSD is longer acting at the receptor than psilocybin, and the thesis being that small dosing might be more effective for microdosing, but unfortunately that thesis was unproven in our latest phase 2b trial, so not much more to add.
Yeah, for us, as we're looking at the intersection of psychiatry and neurodegeneration, there's a few scores like the neuropsychiatric inventory. So this covers 12 different domains within psych, and specifically in these patient populations, you see agitation and apathy, and these are the main ones that we're looking at. So even a delta of a couple points can be significant in these trials. So we're looking at that and things like DARE as well for apathy, which has a regulatory precedent and fast track designation, at least in our trials.
And yeah, I'll say that as I see this sector maturing, I think there's a really good reason to think that we may see much more of a segmentation. Neuropsychiatry is every drug works for every indication. Not really, doesn't really work for any of them. But I think as we start to see, so your original question was, is there too much work going on in depression? And I think that probably the answer to that is yes. If everyone has a drug for depression, you're going to have one or two winners, and that's it at the end of the day. And as well as we're starting to see with the later, say the earlier stage, the later in the pipeline, is that the way to put it? Where, say, for example, Chris and I are located, we're now starting to see a more discrete separation of mechanism of action. What exactly you're hitting, is it we're blasting all the serotonin receptors with a focus on the 2A, or are we discretely hitting one or two specific things? And that's certainly what Psilera is doing, what Enveric is doing. And I think we're starting to see different downstream effects. That's my hypothesis, is that we're ultimately going to end up with different drugs that are better in different niches. Certainly for us, we think anxiety is a place that we want to probably play in. And it's not a place that's very conducive to powerful hallucinogenic agents, by the way. Not a lot of not a lot of people with anxiety are really excited about going through that kind of an experience. So I think you're going to see a segmentation of the market as it gets more mature. And, the first few depression drugs will, win, go get them, guys. But the 9th, 10th, 12th, and 20th drug in the depression space that has evolved out of psychedelics is probably, even if it's the best drug ever, probably has no market at that point.
Sorry, I was just going to say that speaks to a lot of education for the psychiatry community and probably primary care.
So I guess it won't be a psychedelics panel without bringing the word unblinding up. So what are your latest thoughts on how the regulators might be approaching this? Because this is not a new concept. It's been around for a long time. Other drugs have been unblinded in trials or potentially are unblinding as well. So as you've designed your trials, do you think there's a potential for goalposts to shift from an FDA perspective on this topic?
Again, it's, as you point out, it's something that has impacted many drugs. It's certainly more robust, I guess, with psychedelics, but I would say that every antidepressant is unblinding as well. If I give you placebo versus olanzapine, I think you'll figure out pretty quickly which one you're on, and ditto with fluoxetine or any of the others. I mean, it's pretty obvious for the most part for the patient and for the provider, right? I mean, if you come in and you gain 14 pounds in 2 weeks, that means you're probably on olanzapine, not placebo, right? So this has always been there. It's been more pronounced here. There are no good answers to this. I mean, I think that's the fundamental issue, right? So the ideal placebo here would be a compound that gives you a psychedelic effect without having efficacy, I guess, but maybe no neuroplasticity. I really don't know what this is going to look like. So there isn't a good way to deal with this. So the agency, again, they're comfortable with what they have now, which is, look at durability, right? Make sure there's difference and look at dose response. I mean, Kabir, Compass did a fantastic job in the phase 2B. The 10 milligram dose was robustly psychedelic, and it did not have very much efficacy. MindMed recently followed it up. They had their phase 2B with LSD, so-called MCP mod design. They went 25, 50, and 100, and 200. There was a big difference in efficacy between the 50 and the 100 microgram dose. Both were psychedelic. So that's the answer. I mean, that's how you show that there's a disconnect between the subjective effects and efficacy.
Does the audience have any questions? We'll get a mic over to you. There's one in front of you.
This has been very interesting. I was impressed that the panel made it clear that they viewed there was a clear statistical significance, did not necessarily lead to a clear clinical benefit, but there's a clear social benefit. So as a investor and a clinician, I kind of worry about that from a regulatory and a payer perspective. Should I be worried? You're going to get approved on a clinical benefit, right? Which you're not, what you're saying is basically it's a numbers game. You got enough patients, you get the statistical significance. Am I reading that correctly? Yeah. But you said clearly the patients benefit on all the social scales, but they don't count from an insurer's or regulatory perspective. Am I reading this right, or in fact, this is viewed differently?
No, I think it's just that nobody's willing to put an anchor out there because, no good deed goes unpunished. That's all.
There's one more.
I was interested by your comment on the slow acceptance by psychiatrists who you'd think would be interested in something that actually seems to work. Why is it so slow? What's holding them back?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few dynamics going on here. I mean, it's the intersection of providers and payer systems, yes. So unfortunately, many patients with chronic serious mental illness are referred from one psychiatrist to another, maybe into a different health system or whatever. And guess what? They still have to step through 2 generic antidepressants. Yeah? So that's why you frequently see people with TRD who have been cycled through 5, 6, 8, 10 drugs. So it's a combination of those two. But it's also, I mean, people, let's remember, we're talking about psychedelics. We seem to have been talking about them for the last few years. But remember, we're still right at the start of the generation of really large, robust data sets in psychedelics, yes? I mean, ours will be the first big phase 3 studies to read out. And so, rightly, many are just waiting for data.
So I guess the last second question for each of you, simple yes or no. Do you think a psychedelic is going to be approved in 2026? And it doesn't have to be a specific one. So Kabir, you don't have to make a specific comment on
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to go with no. 26? No. Yeah.
Maybe.
I didn't know that was an option.
It wasn't.
I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for everyone on the panel. I think that what's good for patients is good for everyone, and a rising tide lifts all boats. And the first 5-HT2 agonist to FDA approval is a huge accomplishment. So whether it's this year or next, it's I think a high probability of success.
Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for